I'm here with Corey Robin, who is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College, as well as the CUNY Graduate Center, author of The Enigma of Clarence Thomas, The Reactionary Mind and Fear. Corey, good to see you.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with The Enigma of Clarence Thomas, which is, by the way, a terrific book. Were you surprised by the news that came out of this relationship of gifts and purchases between billionaire Harlan Crow and Justice Thomas?
I wasn't surprised by the fact of those gifts. This is something that has been reported extensively over the years, Thomas's relationship with wealthy right-wing donors, and some kinds of strange gifts. I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, it was reported that he got $1,200 in tires from an Omaha businessman. So these kinds of things have been known for a long time. I do think the extent of the relationship and the magnitude of money that was involved in that, I think that has been something of a surprise, that even someone like myself who's been following Thomas for quite some time was taken aback by.
You know, it's interesting. You're not a legal scholar. We're not going to ask you about the legalities of this, but what does it say about the mindset? One of the things I think about, especially since he was a product of Jesuit education, this, show me the boy at 7 and I'll show you the man, or many other cliches come to mind. I'm just so curious about this dichotomy, which you've written about, of the relationship that he has with Crow and what it really says about his worldview that we perhaps underestimate.
Since the very beginning of his career, Thomas has really sought to elevate men of wealth, men of money. He really sees them as taking a very important and high role in society. There's a speech he gave in 1987 at the Pacific Research Foundation, which is a think tank in San Francisco, Pacific Research Institute, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
where he complains that liberals for too long have dismissed men of money, men of wealth, businessmen, and that he sees it as his project to remoralize those men, to really give them the standing that he believes that they deserve. And then on the court, he's written a series of decisions about campaign finance where he lays out in very clear detail why it is that wealthy individuals should in fact have more access to public officials. So this is a position that he has taken not in secret, but openly, written many, many court opinions. And one of the reasons why I set out to write my book was that Clarence Thomas has been telling us who he is in many, many ways. But because of certain cliches and cartoonish ideas that we have about him, we haven't paid attention to that paper trail.
One of the interesting aspects for me has always been race. If you go into his office, he's got this very big portrait of a black man looking quite defeated, and he'll say that that's me. I look at that picture and I look outside and I see people walk and I wish I was them. It's like a man who is defeated, and yet then you go outside and he is at the Heritage Foundation. He is having dinner with Harlan Crow. There's something that seems almost not mutually exclusive, but I'm not quite sure how to read it. And this reminded me of that dichotomy within Thomas again. What does it say to you? I mean, tell us a little more about how he views race in this context, because he rarely talks about it openly.
I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the arguments of my book is that Thomas, going back to his time at Holy Cross, which of course you've written about, that Thomas is a Black nationalist. This will come off as a very strange sounding claim, particularly at this moment in time when he's palling around with white people like Harlan Crow. But Thomas has, from the very earliest parts of his academic career, taken on the idea that racism is a permanent feature of American life, that Black people will always get the short end of the stick in America, that Black people need to stand together as a group, and in particular that Black people need to follow the direction of Black men, strong Black men. Thomas has said repeatedly, the fate of Black people depends upon the fate of Black men. One of the men he's thinking about when he says that is his grandfather, who was a very strong, powerful, iron-willed man, who owned his own business in Savannah and achieved a kind of stature in the community and a level of wealth. Thomas sees the salvation of Black people in that kind of Black man. In that speech I spoke about just a second ago, where he talked about remoralizing men of wealth, he talks a lot about his grandfather and how liberals would, almost spit on his grandfather as a pathetic figure. And so I think when Thomas thinks about race, he thinks on the one hand, as you say, of a very bedraggled people, a people beaten down, but he sees a path of salvation in powerful Black men. And I don't think it's such a leap from that to then see a model in powerful white men, some of whom are self-made. Thomas really sees a kind of an affinity there. So I don't, while these two, while Harlan and race may seem mutually exclusive, I do actually think they go together in a certain way. And that is part of unraveling that enigma of Clarence Thomas.